of the way that we've incentivised foreign direct investment, innovation and entrepreneurship in the country. So if you look at, let's say, Macedonia, which was a massive piece of an economy, and you look at it in terms of just the incentive that they put in place, everything from the lowest flat tax rates and profits, everything from fast company registration, everything to enable foreign direct investment to come in. And I suppose the real sort of challenge that I would see in terms of innovation in a smart economy is around this whole area of distinctiveness, around competitive capability. So you're looking at in terms of how that competitiveness translates at a national level, into a firm level, regions, and down in terms of an individual level. If I was looking at in terms of the structural changes, again I would see is in terms of the big sort of changes around what Julian had talked about, is the way that managers manage, the way organisations are organised. And I would argue is that it's not about building organisations, it's about building communities for the future, very much anchored around the innovation theme. Also, I suppose no one has a monopoly of knowledge, so the way you're going to exploit and explore for knowledge is maybe in very, very distinct ways that are over and above in terms of what has been here. And if you look at sort of the Googles and Facebooks, as I would say the experimenters in terms of what this new sort of world would look like, is what Google have created is not alone of flexible internal organisational structures, but also in terms of the physical way that they've organised work, it is a fun place to work. They've also sort of leveraged in terms of purpose within individuals, but also given them some degree of flexibility. If I look at Facebook, is that, in terms of their exploration sort of capacity, is that they have allowed people and different users to come in back and develop an awful lot of different activities for profit, and also in terms of the mass proliferation of Facebook. The next, I suppose, big trends I would see is in terms of the whole rapid changes in science. In some senses, it's driving innovation, and particularly around what I would say is the strong area of growth is convergent technologies. So companies are seeing that traditional sort of growth opportunities in their industries are very limited. So if you're looking at in terms of horizontal innovation, there are more opportunities. So if you look at Intel's sort of investment, you can see that. Most fundamentally, once we get through this sort of financial crisis, it will be the oil-producing countries when the dollar, a barrel of oil, I should say, goes more than to $100, maybe $200, $300. I mean, they will have serious cash flow and capital. And also, I suppose you look at in terms of central banks in Asia, in terms of they will have an influence in terms of the innovation and investments. Also, we're seeing a sort of change where it seems to be very, very easy to scale your business in a global sense. So brands that we wouldn't have been aware of, like Bebo and Twitter and Skype, all of these have grown very, very quickly over the last number of years in a very rapid period of time. And for me, I think the most sort of fundamental change is around the collaborative innovation model. So if you take, let's say, an old traditional sort of giant and conventional company like IBM, what they have set up is a non-for-profit company under the sort of umbrella called Blade.org. And what they have is invited a number of different players, both large and small, to work in terms of their intellectual property. And what that does for them competitively gives them a response and broadens out their innovative capacity. It hoovers up some of the strongest intellectual capital in the market. And also gives them a resilience quite broader than their own organisation. But as I would argue is that being innovative is just not enough. If you take sort of the classic example of two brands in one company of the VAG group, you look at Audi in terms of when they launched the A6 a number of years ago, when they relaunched that. They claim that they registered more patents for that car than NASA did that year, something in excess of 3,000. Very much fits with the whole notion of Deutschsprung technique. If you look at the same company and the different brand, the Volkswagen Phaeton, this was, I suppose, to mark us as the resurgence of Volkswagen as a brand, post the Golf and Passat brand. And guess how successful it was in the UK market? They only sold 48. So you can see as in terms of being innovative, it's comparable in terms of the Audi A6, but you have to have the fit and in terms of the marketplace and also in terms of customer expectations. But for most companies, I suppose this would be a more familiar sight. Mine to market in 3,000 days. We repeatedly squashed this idea for almost 10 years, but now our competitors is launching it. Let's drop everything and let's ship it in July. Okay, this very much sort of emergent sort of gung-ho attitude in terms of a significant response to it. Because competitors are doing it and a feeling of that pressure in terms of the performing around innovation. What I would see is in terms of the core elements of innovation, I would sort of broaden it in terms of three areas. First and foremost, I would argue it's about really business strategy and about really defining your core purpose. And that is that's more deeper than saying it's a vision and mission. It is, what are you fundamentally about? What is your core philosophy in driving your business and in whatever particular direction? And if you look at sort of Tesco, I know it's an example, and people have very, very different views of Tesco, but Tesco's core purpose is not selling you groceries, all of this, the various different products it sells. It is about absolutely maximising the customer value from each one of you. Conceptually, that core purpose is distinctly different than maybe other of the competitors in the market. Secondly, it's about this relentless pursuit of differentiation. So when you're looking at innovation in terms of, be it your management model, be it the various different organisational innovation, product process, it is about when you interact with a customer that you're absolutely going over the game line in terms of your competitive performance. And that is distinctly different in terms of the experience and the whole packaging. So it's like a hotel. So the experience that whatever you offer in terms of hotel and the way that you differentiate it, that is the same at 12 o'clock in the night when people are pissed and God knows doing whatever else, as opposed to a Monday morning when you're servicing conference clients. And ultimately it is about competitiveness. And I would say it's broadening out more than from the sort of economic, but also in terms of the social aspects of that. I would say it involves in terms of change, collaboration with multiple actors. Really it's also absorbing what's happening out in your external environment. And again, I suppose I would agree with Julie in terms of this whole idea of experimentation and learning. So if you look at Aldi, they'll only trial sort of product categories in 3 stores. If it works in 3 stores, they roll it out to all their stores in Europe. But I believe it is in terms of about experiential understanding of your context. So what you see in terms of businesses are taking short, sharp sort of interactions through maybe focus groups, maybe different sort of methodologies around marketing in terms of understanding their context. And when I look at sort of Tesco before they went into the US market, like they forced about 100 or so of their managers to actually live with different family units in the States to get an understanding of what their behavioural patterns, what are their challenges, and particularly when they're approaching the world from looking at where they can create and maximise value. So looking at understanding people and their context has paid off for them. And I suppose the other way is looking at what footwear, but if you look at sort of Cunningham in terms of a shoe manufacturer in Spain, and they would claim that one of their most innovative sort of capacity is around making shoes that actually fit your feet. And you look at it in shoe stores in Spain, it's Cunningham and it's innovation in English. And this is in terms of what they have. They have a very clear business strategy, a very clear differentiation, and a very, very clear view in terms of competitiveness. But also, I suppose, it is about the discourse in terms of organisations, in terms of how we talk about innovation. And it comes back, I suppose, to one of the points that Julian says, and how do we actually convey what innovation is? And if you look at it, there's a quote taken from the CEO of Toyota, and the way he describes in terms of what innovation in Toyota is. And he would claim as CEO of the organisation for working for 40 years, he really doesn't really understand how Toyota works effectively. He says, I don't know how many years it's going to take us, but I want Toyota to come up with the dream car. A vehicle that makes the air cleaner than it is, a vehicle that cannot injure people, a vehicle that prevents accidents from happening, a vehicle that can make people healthier, and the longer they drive it, a vehicle that can excite, entertain, evoke the emotions of its occupants, a vehicle that can drive around the world on just a tank of gas. That's what I dream about. And the analogy I would make in terms of innovation is about the analogy of love, the metaphor of love. We all understand in terms of love, we've all experienced it in very, very different ways. And in some senses, I suppose the challenge for managers and CEOs and individuals is to sort of ground sort of that metaphor of innovation. And if you were to put that up in 100 years' time or 200 years or 1,000 years' time, that quote would be as relevant. And in some senses, it's the contribution of individuals towards that sort of dream. And in some senses, they achieve some of that in whatever shape or form over a particular period of time. But I would argue that innovation is around creating this emotional connectivity to people. And also, I suppose, it is about moving away from the survival of the safest mentality. Ideas are fragile at this stage. That's the craziest idea I've ever seen, and risky. If it was really a good idea, someone would have already thought of it. Let's get rid of it. In some senses, if you are looking at in terms of controlling and being safe, but if you're looking at in terms of businesses around sustainable competitive advantage, about really being different, about really being competitive and going over the game line, survival of the safest isn't the way to go. And what I would argue is that really the role of managers is going from doing to enabling, to absolutely unleashing the personal creativity of individuals, to also look at in terms of developing sort of creative capacities and socialisation within their organisational boundaries. But also it's going beyond that in terms of their broader context. And sometimes you look at in terms of the evaluation of performance within organisations is post-event. So if you take the analogy of in terms of rugby players, let's say take the Lions Tour and other sorts of international rugby players, is they get a DVD after every match in terms of highlights their best practices and also highlights in terms of where they need to improve their game. I would argue in terms of if companies are serious around sort of developing and growing and maybe reinventing their management model, is that they need to sort of enable that and also feedback that real-time performance. And also to understand and reflect what are the practices, both in terms of the strategy and management practices, that actually enable performance and that they have succeeded. So if you take an example of, let's say, McDonald's, that they would say that their ultimate aim is to achieve 100% satisfaction in every store, in every place in the world, every day. And in some senses, they're nowhere going to achieve that. Yes, it's a stretch goal, but in terms of that they are constantly evolving both their management practices in order to ensure that goal may be met in some shape or form over a particular period of time. And really I would sort of argue it's about looking at in terms of reflecting, say, okay, too often we look at sort of failure, but also to look and reflect in terms of are there practices that we can hone again and when around innovation and driving innovation culture in an organisation. So very much like the analogy of the rugby players. If I look at in terms of what innovation and smart economy is, and I think I suppose we have all different ideas. I suppose if you look at the popular business press, it's all around the green economy, and I suppose this is to deal with a fundamental sort of challenge that we have around energy going forward. We have a sort of an image in our head around maybe it's a science and technology argument, that it is this linear model of investing in sort of new diagnostic capabilities, new ways of dealing with some problems. But also I would argue that it's much broader. It has to actually extend into looking at social outcomes. So when companies are looking at in terms of deploying sort of trying to maximise economic value in terms of well-developed countries, that they're also looking at in terms of how they can deploy their technology in lesser developed countries, and also using maybe different business models to do that. But I would say as a core purpose of innovation and smart economy is fundamentally about sustainability of competitiveness right across the different actors within the economy. But I think it's more fundamental than that. I think it's about actually delivering and achieving and creating both economic and social resilience and capacity. And it's very interesting, I suppose, over the last number of months in terms of being the director of CISC, I suppose I've sat in a number of different presentations from my colleagues, let's say, in gerontology, family child support and disability, in terms of the other research centres. And one of the words that they constantly use in terms of resilience. And if you look in terms of business literature, I think, a lot of, some literature talks about the resilience of the firm. And really what I suppose a smart economy, I think, ideally should be trying to achieve is that in some senses you're both giving a strong economic and social core and resilience at a national competitive level, at an individual competitive level, and also at a management competitive level that you can withstand. So in some senses, if you look at the last 18 months, a lot of us and a lot of business have been paralysed by what has happened. And in some senses have become questioning about in terms of a lot of things, which is justifiable. But I suppose the resilience has been really, really tested and maybe in some senses has been lacking and not there. But also a capability to respond to the challenges ahead. And I think that is one of the sort of the legacies should be of in terms of innovation and smart economy. When I look at it in terms of some of the core challenges around innovation, maybe some of them I suppose is fundamentally I would believe strategic challenges. It's looking at, okay, how do you actually reorientate and reinvent your organisational structure to actually look at in terms of collaboration in a broader sense, while minimising maybe some risks and dealing with the trust issues. It's also thinking how you're going to actually grow your human capacity, both in terms of your exploitative capacity and also your exploration capacity. And I suppose the human resources that you need for both are very distinctly different. But also I suppose innovation is about managing risk and the type of resource allocation that you have put in place. But I suppose deeper than that, I suppose, is really looking at in terms of how businesses really think about how they acquire knowledge and competitive intelligence. So how does your business actually understand deeply, the social, economic, cultural issues, not alone in terms of their competitive environments that you're already in, but in terms of the broader ones. Also, it's looking at how the combination of, well, your technology road mapping. You're looking at in terms of how you co-create, because this is, I suppose, around convergent technologies. And what is your business model trajectory? And how do you experiment with all of those sort of challenges? And I suppose, for me, innovation is really have this, what Mintzberg talked about is this mastery of detail, of your context, and of what makes your company competitive, and how those two oscillate. What I would say is in terms of there's real opportunities both in the technology side, but also really to experiment with new collaboration forms. I would say convergent technology, let's say, as I talked about yesterday, in terms of your ICT and biomedical companies, creating new markets, technology, services and products. But I don't think it's, primarily in terms of a scientific or technology one. Even just before the Volvo Ocean Race, I heard on, let's say, on local radio, let's say a taxi company and a pizza company working together in order to sort of survive and grow their business in the current economic crisis. But also it is like maybe Tesco is conceptually looking at your marketplace in a very, very different way than maybe the traditional way you've looked at it. Looking at it in terms of needs around particular sectors, needs and maybe value-spanning activities. Conceptually looking at the world in a very, very distinct and unique way. And also it's looking at in terms of collaborating with the different actors and also with knowledge assets, like universities and public funded research, and leveraging those in an effective way. So if you look at, let's say, the next trend in terms of biometrics is vascular biometrics, which basically is saying, we're looking at in terms of your vascular structure and looking at in terms of that as a security device. On its own, one of those sort of players is not going to be able to sort of develop that. So you need to look at in terms of this co-creation model and developing sort of convergent sort of technology platforms that allows you to grow a whole lot of different product families. And in some senses, I put up there of the Google iPod. And really what you're looking at is creating a convergent platform or an innovation capacity that no matter the icons within your business may change, but you have a flexibility, a fluidity, and a resilience and a capacity around different collaborative forms in order to drive your innovative capacity and also your responses to it. But I would argue, I suppose, our collective competitive challenge is about market making based on innovation. If I would say innovation is about actually changing the game, it's about setting the competitive agenda. And it is maybe around some scientific and technical capability, but it's fundamentally reconceptualizing the world and the competitive environment that you're in. So you look at what Google are doing, you look at in terms of really it is a competition of around building communities, not organizations. It is around creating a sort of a mass movement of community. And if you think of communities in where you live, and you look at the dynamics, the attributes involved in terms of community interaction, there's some degree of reciprocity, there's a response, there's rights, but also there's some degree of core focus and purpose in doing that. And if you look at in terms of, sort of I suppose, in an Irish context, you look at U2 in terms of very much market making based on some of their innovative capacity, both in terms of their management capability around Paul McGuinness, around their artistic capability, and also their ability to embrace technology and be one of the first, for example, to embrace Apple iTunes, which added something like, 100 million nearly $500 million to Apple's share price when they signed it up. And they were the first sort of music artists to do that. If I was looking at in terms of, just to wrap up in terms of some of the practical steps, if I look from a strategy point of view, which is my core discipline area, sort of a lot of fuzziness. What do human beings crave is a singularity of purpose, and in some senses, I suppose a lot of sort of issues around sort of business competitiveness is around creating a very, very clear strategic and unambiguous strategic direction. That doesn't mean that you can be very, very emergent in your approach. That approach changes. But that strategic direction is very much embedded around a core purpose of what your organisation does. It's also fundamentally thinking, I suppose, goes back to the statistics that Julian showed in terms of the lack of engagement. So if you look at most people come to work, and if you look at in terms of, particularly in Western countries, is that they are not engaged in terms of the environment that they work in. So if you're looking at in terms of trying to unleash that, what I call that personal innovation capacity, then it's how do you actually begin to incentivize that, but also in terms of how do you actually broaden out that sort of collaborative and creative capacity beyond your organisational boundaries. So for example, you look at some companies are sort of looking at paying students to look at monitoring sort of social networking sites in terms of what different people are saying about their companies, to really understand in terms of, well, are the core values or the core differentiation factors really have an impact in terms of maybe social media activities. But like sort of the analogy around metaphor of love, innovation has to be seen as a real everyday lived reality for business. So therefore, the structures you put in place, the way that managers and different people in the organisation enable that to happen is very, very important. And also it is about taking some degree of risk that does fundamentally sort of undermine sort of the whole overall competitiveness of the business, but also is to learn from that, is to reflect very, very deeply and fundamentally about that. And also it's about being very, very clever about maximising the state assets. If I was looking at in terms of innovation, it's about consistent and relentless action. So you're thinking, what have I Sarkozy up for? And I'm thinking, have I lost the plot totally? But if you look at, there's a number of reasons, I suppose. Number one, if you look at The Economist a number of weeks ago, says that Sarkozy's and the French model around how they, the big state model is the model to follow in terms of innovation and competitiveness. And generally, I don't know, they probably will cut him down maybe a number of years later, in a few years' time. But what it struck me is in terms of reading sort of his biographies and his book, is that he firmly believes that you create your own future. And again, his quote, I think he was very, very apt in terms of innovation context. I've been convinced since I was very young that you have to make your own future, otherwise you're condemned to accept whatever comes your way. So for businesses, I think every sort of entrepreneur and every business person sets out to try and create and do something different. Is not to accept the status quo. But if you look at in terms of the way that organisation has been structured, that always can get lost in the way. It's no secret I know in my childhood I was impatient to become an adult and to become free. In some senses, the more competitive you are, it creates maybe more constrictions, but also gives you a freedom to actually experiment and try new things. Desire for independence made me determined to live the present with energy of someone who knows that the promise of the future does not come automatically. I think this is more pertinent in terms of the Ireland Inc. point of view. In some senses, we've spent, I suppose, a number of different decades trying to achieve what we've achieved. So now that we've got here and we've experienced some, real turbulent times, what are we going to do in terms of the future going ahead? Innovation is also about the inherent ambition that you have, not only collectively, but individually in terms of for your business. And as Wright talks about, without ambition, no conquests are made, no lands discovered, no businesses created. Again, goes back to the whole notion of engagement at each individual person in your business. How engaged, how motivated are they in terms of the implementation side, but also in terms of delivering of that performance. Ambition is the root of all achievement. Ambition is the spirit of success and striving for something worth achieving. And again, I suppose it goes back to in terms of how you describe and discourse of innovation in your own organisation. How do you describe what is it that you're worth achieving for in your own particular context? How do you describe that someone down in terms of a shop floor that maybe is not too interested in terms of innovation to different other stakeholders right around in terms of your community? And I suppose as Muhammad Ali said, impossible is nothing. But I leave you with, I suppose, the Nike one. It's just doing it. It is about actually, putting into action. It's about trying, about experimenting, about pushing sort of the boundaries, and actually about making it happen in small pockets and maybe growing it within your business. Thank you very much. So, lunch is over in Forest, which is just next door, and maybe we might come back around 1:30, so it gives an opportunity for...
The business and law schools here, and it's interesting thinking about the leadership and management. I was the leader who engaged in InterTrade Ireland to bring it here, and then he deserted the ship. And poor James and Angela got the management task of bringing it all together. So I think they've done an excellent job. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers here. I don't propose to introduce them one by one. They're all very capable readers, and their extensive bios are before you in your reading pack. So I think we'll go straight into it. The format will be that they will present, and then we'll do question and answers at the end. So, no further ado, I'll hand you over to Brian.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what I guess is the beginning of the graveyard shift. Hopefully it doesn't actually pan out that way. It occurred to me actually when I sat down this morning and thoroughly enjoyed this morning's proceedings that it was many years since I was actually last in a lecture theatre, and in fact when I think back it's because, as I recall, I was mentally scarred by an incident that took place in the main lecture theatre in Manchester University when I was studying law, and quite unexpectedly my then girlfriend appeared at that door to terminate our relationship, and I was sitting with my cronies on the back row, and everybody thoroughly enjoyed an expose of my private life for 2 or 3 minutes, which taught me a salutary lesson about a lot of things. The company I work for makes buses, so I guess this is bringing the discussion down to earth with a very big bump. And some of them actually, I'm pleased to say, running around in Galway. I was pleased to see that last night. They're still on the road, still doing good service. You may or may not have heard of us. Wright Bus is a manufacturer based in Northern Ireland. We're about half an hour north of Belfast, in the town of Ballymena, which is where we've always been for over 60 years. Our company is family owned. It's still in private ownership. The name Wright is the family name. And I guess the privilege and the challenge to a certain extent of being the first non-family member to become chief exec. I still have a family chairman and I've got family board members, and it's a very interesting kind of a dynamic as we've sought to modernise and to grow the company in the last number of years. You may not have heard of us, but you would have heard of some of our competitors, Mercedes, Volvo, Scania, MAN. And we compete both locally and internationally with the big boys, and we need to punch way above our weight in order to do that, and we do things differently. We've never been frightened of a challenge. We've always sought out the niches. We've always sought out the difficult road, I guess. And that has really what has served us in good stead. And I'd like to just really spend the next 10 minutes or so picking out a few kind of highlights, if you like, along that path, and sharing those with you, and really just from the viewpoint of, I guess, an innovation practitioner, how these things often occur in real life, planned and unplanned. So the sort of things I want to touch on are our adoption 30 years ago of an aluminium build structure for our vehicle, whereas prior to that all vehicles had always been built out of heavy-duty steel, and many still are. Now 20 years ago we pioneered and patented the concept of the low-floor accessible bus. 10 years ago we were the first to market with a zero-emissions vehicle, and more recently broadening that into full-blown hybrid rapid transit. So this is the giant Meccano kit that you would see if you strip back the outer layers of our bus. We call the system Illuminique. It's a bolted aluminium system. It requires no rivets, no welding. The roots of it actually were in a system that we licensed about 30 years ago from a Swiss railcar manufacturer. And the more we kind of got into the system, the more we realised it had fantastic potential for what we were doing. Not only was it a very appropriate material for building vehicles, very, very lightweight, eminently recyclable, but also it meant that we could chop and change our design very, very rapidly. It doesn't require significant jigging and big investment tooling. We actually make our own jigs and tools out of the very system itself. And this has become really the backbone of what we do. And interestingly now, 2 or 3 other manufacturers in the UK have adopted a very similar system. We continue to refine, we continue to innovate and to patent all of our breakthrough ideas to make sure that Illuminique is internationally something that is associated and recognised exclusively with ourselves. The concept of the low-floor accessible bus, which pretty much everybody would take for granted, if you were to jump on any of the stopping buses in Galway, Dublin for that matter, you would actually be, you wouldn't be confronted with a series of steps. You wouldn't be confronted with narrow gangways. You would be confronted with a very open boarding area, a flat platform to walk along, lots of handholds and so forth, so that if you were visually impaired or disabled, you can ease your way to your seat in safety. Well, buses weren't always that way. And the concept for developing the low-floor vehicle, which is in response to a statutory challenge, originated in our company in Ballymena. And what we looked at the time was the typical buses that were built on trucks, very, very high floor, ladder frame chassis. And we thought, how on earth do we get passengers to that kind of high floor without steps and without impairment. And we thought, you know, the other way of looking at this actually would be, how do we lower the chassis to the ground and actually eliminate those steps in the first place? So we figured out basically how to redesign the chassis of the vehicles to essentially lower the boarding platform closer to the pavement, and that coupled with the lowering, what we call the kneeling suspension now that is common in all vehicles, is what actually accomplishes that trick. When we first brought this to market, it was the usual thing, you know, this is bound to be expensive, this will be difficult to maintain, it'll never catch on. And guess what? It's the law, and it's 100% of the way buses are made now. Not just in the UK, but increasingly throughout Europe and indeed in North America. Big thrust in the last number of years has also been the whole area of low carbon vehicles. And we first started to experiment with this about 11 years ago when we built an all battery bus and tested it locally. And you may say, well, what's so clever about that? We've had electric milk boats for donkey's years. But yes, but buses are 18 tons GVW and need an awful lot of momentum to get going, and even at that need to run 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this isn't just a technology demonstrator, this is something that has to do a very, very hard job of work round the clock in very punishing circumstances. So we moved on from what was basically a plug-in vehicle, a complete battery bus, to the technology that we use today, which is a hybrid of diesel and electrically generated power. Just to put that in context, a typical diesel bus would probably be powered by, today, a 9-litre Euro 4 fairly clean diesel engine. The engine that's in the double-decker there at the bottom of the screen that's in London is a 2.4-litre Ford engine, so considerably smaller and therefore considerably less polluting, 35 to 40% less CO2, virtual elimination of NOx and various other polluting emissions, and a big saving in fuel consumption, somewhere about 40% today, but with the help of a project that's underway with Queen's University, we're trying to tweak that up to about 45%, and eventually we think that 50% saving will be achievable. And so the thing starts to become economically viable. There's a very big push to get these kinds of vehicles into London in particular. The previous mayor, Ken Livingstone, made a commitment to a climate change policy. It's to achieve certain objectives by 2025. And the impetus of the Olympics has meant that even his successor, Boris Johnson, wasn't going to break that policy. So London is on track to acquire something like 600 or 700 of these vehicles to be in service by 2012. We've recently supplied a vehicle to Dublin. Belfast has yet to do anything about it. I say that everywhere I go. We've taken that hybrid technology really to another level now, and we're starting here to blur the distinction between buses, light rail, and mass transit people movers. This is a vehicle that we call the streetcar. That's its kind of brand name, and I describe it as a rapid transit vehicle, an RTV. I don't describe it as a bus. I don't want it to have the stigma, if you like, that most people kind of grew up with when they were kids on the school bus. So I want them to see this as a genuinely futuristic alternative form of transport, and something that they will enjoy, something they can take pride in riding, and not a distressed purchase. This was also a first. This vehicle, which was developed initially in diesel form for British markets, has now been developed in hybrid electric form. And with this, we were able to break into quite a lucrative contract in Las Vegas. We're currently building 50 of these. We've shipped the first 25, number 25 to go, and they will be in service probably by the end of the year, January at the latest. And they will complement all of the other futuristic forms of transport that you would see in Las Vegas, very, very in keeping with the theme of that city. But again, very, very different from the humble bus. Something which was, I think, regarded by our industry competitors and colleagues as being too big a mountain to climb. When the tender came out for this particular project, all of the American manufacturers fell away in the first round. That left 3 international competitors, and that was whittled down to 1 ourselves. So we don't mind challenges like that, and we knew it was going to be a mountain to climb. But in many respects, it really raised the bar. It challenged us really as an organisation on every front, and for the last 2 years, that's what we've been focused on doing, and has taught us so much. So just very quickly, how that sort of came from drawing board to reality, and I'll just flick fairly quickly through this. But we obviously do the usual extensive market research and feasibility studies. That involves placing, for instance, video cameras in vehicles to actually understand the way people move, how they get on the bus, how they interact with the driver, if they interact with the driver, where they want to seat, where kids want to sit, where mums with buggies want to steer the pram of the buggy, where the elderly look for a seat. And that taught us an awful lot about the layout. And because we were trying to shatter the illusion of what a bus can offer, we wanted to do things very, very differently. So that was a really interesting starting point. We then make a series of mock-ups, and in this illustration, really, I'm showing the whole driver's area. We deliberately wanted to reproduce the experience of the Lewis, of the tram. And we wanted to have off-bus ticketing. We wanted to give the driver a sealed compartment, an element of security, some pride in the job, let them really concentrate on the job in hand of moving 125 people safely through the city, and really decouple all other transactions. And again, make it very different from a conventional bus. But to get the whole space envelope right, to get the driver's economics right, you can do a lot with 3D design, but you can't beat actually building mules and mock-ups to really test the theory. We do use pretty sophisticated 3D design tools, and we use fine surfacing tools to actually do the styling. The leap that we made on this project that really engaged us with technology that we hadn't done before was to take the 3D design and feed it straight to a 6-axis router that cut the whole of the front end of that vehicle. Took about 10 days. We would normally have spent probably 3 months doing that internally with traditional pattern making, and this was actually through a connection we made with a company that supports the Formula One business. So a lot of these little companies in the south of England that do all the Formula One sports cars use this rapid prototyping technique, and it was that combination of software and the 6-axis router that for us has been a real breakthrough, and we've gone on to do that now for a number of components. It has its place certainly, and was an enormous saver of both time to market, but also in terms of realising the artist's original concept. Next step really was to get into the nut and bolt stuff, the detailed engineering, the packaging of components, weight distribution, focusing on the elimination of noise and vibration, handling issues, and that's the kind of gutsy stuff that will absorb you for something like a year in a program like this. We also have our own in-house finite element analysis capabilities, where we have structural engineers who have become probably industry experts or industry leading experts on the structure and performance of metals in buses. To my knowledge, we're the only bus manufacturer that has an in-house capability for FE. Up there in the north, of course, we've got a very strong aerospace player, Bombardier, and we went to the engineering team in Bombardier to headhunt a couple of really top-notch guys who understood how plastics and metals, how steel and aluminium and composites all interact. And they built up this computational model. They've been at this for now 10 years, and we've got probably some of the most detailed models in the business. But what it allows us to do is to predict way in advance of cutting metal how our vehicle's going to perform. And then in practice, of course, we validate through a very rigorous testing program. This is a bus actually being tilted. We've got a tilt through 45 degrees. When we took the vehicle to the States, we also had to do a lot of crashworthiness testing. Front, back, side, roof overload, a rollover test. We had to do an accelerated durability trial, which is basically simulates 500,000 miles on the clock. Very, very intensive. And that's obviously the proof of the pudding. People don't imagine that you have to do all of this for buses. It's just like it's just like building cars. The difference is that a car manufacturer will probably spend 7 years in design and development and then go on to press the button and build 10 million of them. We normally, from concept to customer, take about 15 months. Sometimes less. And then we've probably got about 3 years worth of a market before we need to actually change the model and move on again. So we have to be very, very fleet of foot and very, very sharp in terms of actually managing our costs through those processes. 40 of those vehicles in the initial diesel form were delivered for service in York, in Leeds and in Swansea. They've also done demonstrations here in Galway, and in Cork and in Limerick, and if things ever get back on track, there is actually a proposal for rapid transit systems in those cities, and the notion is that They maybe can't justify either the cost or the investment over the long term in a Lewis type system, but they can justify something significantly better than a bus service for the particularly highly population density corridors. And this is the kind of vehicle that offers that interim or that intermediate solution. What we're about really with a project like this is really shifting perceptions and trying to say to people, you know, it doesn't look like a bus, it doesn't smell like a bus, it doesn't taste like a bus. It's actually a lot nicer than a train or an aircraft. You've got more space, you've got alternative seating layouts. We've done an awful lot of work in terms of the feel of the materials. We've done a lot with lighting systems, ambient lighting, uplighters, downlighters, LEDs, to really change the vehicle. You walk on a streetcar and it's like something you've never been on before, and that's really what it's all about. It's that wow factor that car designers are always looking for. And you know, the commercial reality is that you do the right things and people want the product. So you know, we see this now as an opportunity to move to other US cities. We'll probably have to do that through a local partner, building under license. We've done that before. We've exported small buses to the States for 10 years in kit form. You know, we take our Meccano kit and we pack it down basically into an ISO container and we send them out for assembly with our partner company in Kansas. And we'll probably follow a similar route to take advantage of what is a growing market now in North America for these rapid transit kind of vehicles. A little bit closer to home, just to sort of conclude it, sometimes innovation for us isn't about massive, life-changing projects. Sometimes it's a small thing. Sometimes it's adapting to the particular needs, in this case, of a local customer. We, for years, tried to sell our lovely double-decker buses to Dublin and couldn't succeed. And we had sold smaller buses and we had sold bendy buses and we'd done all sorts of things, and the lovely people at Bus Éireann had invested, but we just couldn't crack the nut in Dublin, and we began to ask ourselves, you know, what was going on. And what it really came down to, actually, was understanding the drivers. The drivers are a very powerful group in Dublin Bus. Probably the least said, but they can... with the drivers on your side, you're flying. When the drivers are against you, you've got citywide gridlock. And we had experience in the past, actually, when we delivered our first 22 bendy buses. They sat for 4 months, idle. The drivers took one look at them and basically asked for more money. This was a vehicle that was longer than a standard bus. Therefore, you would expect to be paid more, wouldn't you? At least that was how the argument ran. And our product was blacked. It was effectively blacked. Cut a long story short, there was eventually a concession to the drivers, and they did get something of a premium for driving these awfully long vehicles. To be quickly followed by the electricians, fitters, and would you believe it, the cleaners. So there was this orderly queue forming at the MD's office, and not a fun time. So when we started to look at the double-decker project, we thought, you know, we need to start with the drivers and work our way out. And then the more we studied the driver's cab on one of these buses, the more we realised how different the Dublin driver's cab was to the London driver's cab. They had a different seat. The seat had more rake, it had more tilt, they had a bigger locker. Believe it or not, they had an extra coat hook. And that was the easy stuff. And then the hard stuff was in internal windscreen reflections. And we've prided ourselves in eliminating windscreen reflections, but it turns out there are certain routes, particularly on the outskirts of the city, where the street lighting is particularly low or not continuous. And the drivers were at least claiming anyway that in low light conditions they were getting an awful lot of bounce from inside the vehicle back into the faces, and this was massively distracting. And we thought, well, to change the front of a bus is probably a cool £1 million. Is it really worth all of this effort for what at the time was going to be an order for 50? But anyways, we persevered, and our engineers came up with a solution that effectively tilts the Dublin bus windscreen back. It's meant we've had to remodel the cab area and change a lot of things inside the front of the bus. But just tilting it back 4 or 5 degrees has actually done the trick, and actually eliminated those reflections. It created some complexity in terms of the way we set the glass and packaging the windscreen wipers for safety and performance. But while we were at it, then we listened to what the operators were telling us about problems they had with queues and quick boarding and fast ticketing. So we decided while we were at remodelling the front of the vehicle, well, we would widen the whole entrance area, we'd ease the flow of passengers, we lengthened what we call the overhang from the front of the vehicle and installed these wider doors. And then inside the cab, again, because we were remaking it for the windscreen anyway, we got the drivers up to the factory, which they loved, and we said, okay, tell us where you want everything. Here's a blank canvas, fellas. Tell us where you want the instrument binnacle, tell us where you want all the controls, tell us where you want your radio, here's a choice of coat hooks, is this locker big enough? And, we worked through that. And that kind of on-the-ground demographic and ergonomic study is what actually translated into a new cab design, new dash and instrumentation for Dublin Bus, and the drivers absolutely love it. And the first 50 vehicles were ordered, they've now gone into service, they're doing great, and if Dublin Bus ever gets back on its feet, we'd like to have a repeat order. Having said that, we also took the opportunity to introduce Dublin to our hybrid electric concept, and so this is the vehicle that's running around on trials, has been for 3 months and will be on trials for a further 9 months. Very green in many respects, and hopefully will again lead to a stronger political commitment for more vehicles of this type in Ireland. Belfast is watching developments in Dublin with great interest. So I'd like to really just conclude. It's kind of giving you a flavour for the way we do things and the way we sort of seek out opportunities that tend to be niche opportunities. But as I said earlier, we have to punch above our weight. We have to compete internationally with the big boys, and we'll not do it on pure cost, and we'll not do it by adopting a Me Too philosophy. Steve Jobs of Apple, I think, was the guy that said that innovation distinguishes between leaders and followers, and I think he's right. And certainly it's a path that we have followed as a very proud family-owned company now for over 60 years. And as I look particularly at the economic situation and I look at the increasing international competition, I know it's a path that we will continue to follow. We will dare to be different, and that is what will separate us from the herd. Thank you very much.
We don't make buses. We're a service company. So today I would hope to give you a brief overview of who we are, where we've come from, and where we are on our development journey. LotusWorks is a company that was started by myself in 1989, so compared to Mark there, we're quite young. We're only 20 years in business. It is my second attempt at running a business, the first having failed, and failed quite well, I think. It would be an understatement. That's me. Who are we? We're an engineering services company. We operate mainly in the pharma, medical devices, power and ICT markets. We have 3 divisions. We have Lotus CM, which is construction management. That's a project management and a construction management firm operating in the power industry, mainly in North America. We have Lotus CS, which is construction services. That's an electrical and mechanical contractor. Primarily, most of our business is actually on the east coast of the US. And we have Lotus TS, which is Lotus Technical Services. That offers a range of automation, calibration, operations and maintenance services, facilities management, and other technical services. That company operates in Ireland, UK, USA, and we have started recently in China and Shanghai. As I have mentioned, Lotus was incorporated in 1989. We started with 3 people, and that included myself. Today we employ about 300 people, and we, as I said, we're operating on 3 continents. As you can imagine, the market has changed significantly over the last 20 years or so, and has changed even more so over the last 12 to 18 months. But being innovative is not something that has been forced upon us in the last 18 months or so. We believe that to survive, we have to constantly adapt and change. And our challenge is to maintain the flexibility and the agility of being a small company while we progress to being a large company. That's a big challenge for us. There have always been challenges and been changes for us since we started the company, so these are part of our daily life. So innovativeness is really embedded in the way we function. I would like to share with you some of the challenges and opportunities, and maybe some of the when I was putting this together, what I would have thought were some of the defining moments maybe that came upon us during the 20 years. So one of the first big things that came upon us maybe 10, 12 years ago was the whole IT, web-based invoicing, that type of thing. We were among one of the first companies in the world to go online with one of our multinational customers. We were part of an international pilot program to go paperless. We were given training, and then we were given access directly into the client's accounting systems that enabled us to bill online, to track POs, track payments, track credit notes, all that kind of stuff. Now, that's fairly commonplace today, but 10, 12 years ago, this was a fairly novel idea and a fairly huge learning curve for us. We had to reorganise our own internal policies, procedures, and invest fairly heavily in IT to keep up with this and to become part of it. Working on this obviously created a lot of benefits for us, not least being at the time that as soon as we entered an invoice on the system and pressed enter, the clock started ticking for a 30-day payment. So we got paid faster. That was a huge benefit. Other benefits that came out of this and the lessons learned improved the day-to-day running of our business. Working on this project with a major multinational had the knock-on effect of actually strengthening our own internal systems and strengthening our own internal capabilities. And I think that's something James touched on earlier, is actually the learning from others. You know, that's a huge aspect of what we do and how we live. Within the past 4 or 5 years, we have seen our traditional business remain static, both here in Ireland and in the US. And it remains static. It's probably been optimistic. It probably has contracted. In 2006 or 2005, 2006, we went on a major review of who we are, what it is we're doing. We did a bit of research. We did some market analysis, and we decided to try and get into some industry that had growth potential. Following extensive research, well, it wasn't all that extensive actually, because I didn't write that line. 2006 we acquired a company anyway. Past that piece, we acquired a company on the west coast of the US. Now that company operated in the power industry. It was a construction management, power management company. It operated in power, and within the power industry it operated primarily in renewable power. That business for us has been hugely successful, and when we did the sums there this week, we have delivered since 2006 about 1,500 megawatts of wind power onto the US grid since 2006, and we have delivered about 600 megawatts of conventional power. Again, within the last 12 to 18 months, when we were looking at, again, what it is we do and what we're doing, we decided that there was actually an awful lot more value in the development of these assets, their power generation assets, than there is just in the construction management and the project management of them. So back in July of 2007, we took a lease on 26,000 acres of land in Oregon State, and we're in the process of building our own 200 megawatt wind farm there. We are also partners on a 100 megawatt geothermal project in Utah, and that's quite interesting actually, because that's in partnership with the Shoshone Indian tribe. So there's a fair clash of cultures there between ourselves, our ordinary American people, and our Native American people. So it's an interesting project with some interesting dynamics. We're carrying out feasibility studies on 2 further geothermal sites in Idaho at present as well. We didn't actually, this opportunity didn't come to us. We sought it out, and I would think that having the foresight or having the innovative mindset in the company kind of prepared us to jump on these opportunities, and when we saw an opportunity and when we rooted out an opportunity, it prepared us to actually to embrace it and to make it successful. One of the other things that we have come across there, not come across, but that we do, like as well as being aware of a marketplace and being aware that the market changes, we find that actually benchmarking our company is a critical component in determining the level of health of our company. Every year for the last 3-4 years we have engaged an outside company to come in and benchmark all aspects of our company. Year on year we try to address any shortcomings that we have, and we compare our results against previous year's findings. The obvious benefits of a benchmarking exercise is that it highlights problem areas, and it takes the emotion and the guesswork out of what it is. We have found, though, internally that the process of benchmarking can be just as important as the actual results. We engage our people at all levels within the organisation to assess where we are and to help us to implement improvements. We find that including them from the very beginning wins their support, and it minimises the resistance to change. We feel it motivates a team to work together to exceed the external benchmarks, and it removes emotion, as I said, from the discussions. Reviewing our business internally and externally drives change and drives our company's innovativeness. 2 years ago we engaged in a major review assessing how we represented our business, how we were perceived from the outside, and especially from our customers, our potential customers, and from our employees. The results of that review process led us down the path of redefining our image and branding the company so that we had a brand and an image that would take us into the future. It brought about a complete change in how we presented ourselves to the external marketplace. As our business had grown over 2 decades, we had added new companies and new company names. Our company organisation chart kind of represented a list of geographic locations and geographical names to potential customers, but it said nothing about what we did as a business and how they could benefit from doing business with us. And as a matter of fact, at one stage we had 13 companies in the group, depending on what they did, where they were. We were totally confusing. We commenced the rebranding process and we reinvented our image. We changed, and now we took those 13 companies into 3 distinct but complementary service offerings. And we have that regardless of geography. We have offices that will offer all 3 levels of service, and they're all under the umbrella brand of LotusWorks. The rebranding was a much more painful process than I had expected it to be. We engaged a lot of people internally with it. It required a lot of innovative thinking and a lot of creativity on our side, and given that most of us are engineers and technicians, we found that rather hard. But we do believe now that the time and the money we spent on it, and it was quite an expensive exercise as well, does benefit us, and we now have a fairly clear, consistent, professional offering that will travel across the world for us, and we can present ourselves anywhere in a fairly consistent manner. One of the things, and I had mentioned it earlier, is that we believe that there's an innovativeness that lives within our organisation. But I would say it's fair to say that lives inside most entrepreneurial companies. However, we also believe that it's very important to ensure that there's a culture within the organisation of open, honest and two-way communication, coupled with the understanding that all ideas are welcome, so our business can benefit from it. We capture ideas and our thoughts from our people in 2 ways. Our own internal marketing communications department established an online area on our website for our employees about 18 months, 2 years ago. Most of our employees are site-based and they're contracted onto customer sites, so even getting information to them, getting the information about company developments, getting policies, procedures, all that kind of stuff to them 24/7 is very important. But we've also put some open areas on that where they can feed back, they can comment on any or all aspects of our business. They can come in anonymously and leave whatever messages they care to. leave if they don't want their names associated with a particular message. We encourage ideas. We try and get them to bring it in. We do operate a recognition and a reward system for good ideas. The other thing we do is we hold quarterly focus group meetings with our staff on the customer sites, where we bring them all into a room face to face. We have a member of senior management and we have a member from communications department with us. So we have a one-to-one which usually goes on for maybe 2 hours once a quarter with every member of staff collectively, and if anybody wants to come in individually after, then they can. We look at it that a lot of what we do is we're sending people, and the people we have on sites represent us. So they're facing the customer 24/7. So we need their input, and we need to value their input. The future for us, it requires us to continue to be innovative, to change, to grow and to survive. But that's the challenge of probably every business in the world today. Our future will be guaranteed if we can attain the objectives we have set ourselves. These objectives include establishing a strong presence in Asia, where we will deliver our traditional technical services to manufacturing companies there. That process has already started. We have some people in Asia at the moment, and we would hope to achieve targets there within 3 years. We plan to own, own or part-own 400 megawatt of operational renewable assets in the US over the next 3 years, with another 800 megawatt in pipeline. Alongside our US energy plans, we are on a project at the moment to establish a European renewable MRO business here, based in Ireland and probably the UK. MRO is maintenance, repair and overhaul. We do have training programs in place for all our staff to develop and enhance their skills. And certainly I'm under this one as well, but we are undergoing an organisational, we started in January, an organisational and management review to define what are the skills and knowledge necessary for us to move into the future, become a $100 million company, and see where the gaps are. That one is going to be interesting as well. We plan to increase our level of engagement with third-level institutions, with state agencies and with customers to ensure we remain competitive and continuously deliver value and innovation to our clients. I think this is one area where certainly we as a company, I think Irish SMEs in general, have not been as active as we should. For us, we must always remember that, in order for our company to survive, our clients have to survive and our clients have to remain competitive. And that's even more so relevant today. And this means we must collaborate with them to help them maintain competitiveness. For us, in the short term, that's going to require us inflicting some pain upon ourselves, and it will require some innovative thinking. But the upside of it will help strengthen our relationships, and it will help secure our position with them. The more I read on the concepts and practices and what I've heard this morning on management information, business process management innovation, business process innovation and service innovation, the more I realise that we as a company, we're only at the start of this. But maybe there is no end to us, and I think James alluded to that this morning. Maybe it is a journey. Maybe it's something that is, you're continuously at the beginning of this, and maybe that's what defines you as a company and you as a person, and maybe that's what innovation is all about. There is no destination. Thank you for your time and attention.
I'm going to change topics a little bit. I'm going to talk about the topic of creating corporate value. And I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of the multinational base that's in Ireland. And in this particular instance, I'm representing the American Chamber of Commerce. Like Fergal, I'm on the board of the Chamber, but I also chair the R&D working group of the Chamber. And a lot of the material I use here is material that comes from a report that paper that we produced at the beginning of 2007, which was entitled Retuning the Growth Engine. So that's the background, if you like. When we were talking, Julian was talking this morning about management and the topic of management. he mentioned the Mary Parker Follett, and in fact, it's probably the first time I heard anyone mention Mary Parker Follett. One of the things that she said a long time ago, when she was working with groups in the eastern part of the United States, right after the Great Depression, she found that a lot of people were lost with respect to where things were going, what needed to be done. Not totally dissimilar to where we are ourselves at the moment. And as she was working with people, she found people constantly looking around them, trying to find answers and trying to find direction. And of course, in our own situation, we realised there aren't too many people providing direction, particularly politicians. So one of the quotes that I've always used from Mary Parker Follett was, people should take direction from their situation and not from other people. And that was the basis of her thinking when it came to management and how management structures and an organisation should develop. And it was from that thinking the notion of empowerment was developed. And I think that in the context of the topic that we're talking about here, and particularly the idea of creating value or new value for corporates, that's a very important idea to keep in the back of our head, that we have to look at our situation and we have to make our own minds up with respect to what we should do and what we want to do, and not always be looking around to see what somebody else does. And I have found that when we produced the report Retuning the Growth Engine, and we recommended certain things should be done and so on, people would say, well, is there an instance somewhere else where that might have happened? And I explain to people, well, if there's an instance of where someone else is already doing it, we shouldn't be doing it because it's a little bit late. The whole idea of trying to take advantage of something and get in front is by being different, by being unique and creating some kind of uniqueness. And I think that's important that we think like that. It's important that innovation isn't just about products or services. It's about the way we organise ourselves as companies. It's also the way we organise ourselves as a country. And I think that is, if you like, the context in which I'm talking when I talk about creating new corporate value. To say a little bit about the American Chamber of Commerce, for those of you that don't know anything about it, it obviously represents the FDI base, the US FDI base in Ireland. Foreign direct investment by US companies in Ireland contributes about, in 2008, contributed about 83 billion to our export, which is about 70% of our exports are coming from that base. They would, the US government says basically that there's something like an 83 or 87 billion dollar investment by US companies in Ireland. That's the estimate that they put on that. So it's significant in our context. And Fergal just talked there about his own sort of ethos in the company when it comes to customers, collaborating with customers to help them reach their goals. It's a little bit like that with the Chamber. That's what we do with the members. We work with them to help those corporates achieve their goals. That's what it's about. And given that it's very significant in an Ireland context, we need to have a perspective that says this is a massive advantage that we have over other European countries and over countries in general. We account for something like over 3% of the total US investment overseas, which is more than half of their investment in Europe in total, and is equal to, or probably even a little bit more than, their total investment in India and China. So it's very significant, and it's a big asset that we have, and it's an asset that we need to use. So when we talk in the Chamber, we talk about, when we're selling the positive message, we talk about Ireland as a place that's good for corporates. We try to assemble our message around sort of three words: tax, talent, and competitiveness. So we have used tax very successfully over the last 30 years as an instrument of incentive that has attracted the foreign direct investment here. We have proven over the years that we've been able to produce the talent and the skills necessary. In more recent times, our competitiveness has been fairly significantly eroded, and we need to take about 20% of our cost to get us back onto a base that's reasonable. Otherwise, we won't be able to use those three words in that order in the future. So that's the type of work that's ahead of us. Now, in terms of creating new corporate value, I'm using a chart here that I used when I was in an American corporation, and we were after going through, I had spent about 3 years restructuring the company, closing factories, moving work, essentially moving a lot of work into the APAC region. And at the end of all that, when all that was done and dusted, we still had to turn around and figure out, well, if we're going to be around, if Ireland in this particular case, or the other countries where we were operating in Europe, if we're going to be around, we have to contribute new value. Now, in the Irish context, we use this fairly simple chart. And the simple chart has 2 axes, and one axis is around the human capital and how you build human capital and where that human capital can produce value for the corporate. And in an ICT context, and in my context, we were going from a company that produced products and services, and we wanted to get into the business of research and development. The other important axis is the axis of economic value. How can you contribute more to the economic value, to the profit of the company? And in Ireland, of course, when we made the transition from the old tax system that was used in where we had a 10% manufacturing tax, which was very successful in getting the companies to put the first base of investment here. We switched through the 90s, we switched to the 12.5%, which took a total look at the business, not just at the manufacturing part of it, and it allowed us to attract in other activities other than manufacturing, and has been very successful. As a result of that, you find that a lot of the companies were able to bring into Ireland their trading activities and set up holding companies, and if not holding companies, trading companies, and do a significant amount of their business from here. And that's quite a valuable piece of activity. It's a critical piece of activity in the context of the new US administration and how that pans out, because it's something that adds significantly to the strength of the proposition that we have. And so when we created this chart in the last company, it was done for the purpose of trying to figure out how we travel along both axes and what is the ultimate top right-hand point that we want to get to. And the top right-hand point is where you bring together the output of the human capital and the economic value. And that is basically in the context of an ICT company. It is where you create new value for the company, where you create new products, where you create new markets, and where you can allow the company to go into a space that hasn't been in before. And so in summary, when you're doing that, you're thinking, in an Irish context, you're thinking about, is it a proposition that has global value? It has to have a global perspective, and it has to be something that a corporate can have here that they can't have somewhere else. I always use the analogy of the US in the old movies. When you watch the old movies, you remember they built these great railways right across the United States. And, you know, the old movies, they had the little towns where the train stopped. And we all know from the movies that if the train stopped in the town, it became a city, and if the train didn't stop in the town, it didn't become a city. And it's the same way right now. The railroads are corporates. They're the trains that travel around the world. And if they stop in your place will prosper, and if they don't, they won't. And that's an important message, I think, and it's a positive message in our context, in an Ireland context, because they stop here. We have a station. They come here. We have more people stopping here than anybody else. It's a very, very positive position for us to be in, and something we can rebuild from. So that's important. The other thing that's important that we've demonstrated over the years is that getting an investment, whether it's a corporate investment or any kind of investment, getting somebody to give you something, is always based on the relationship that you have with them. And we have proven over the years that we've been able to create good relationships, good solid relationships, lasting relationships, and that has stood the test of time, and that's important. We need to be unique, and I think everybody that's talking about innovation and that listens to or studies the subject of innovation realizes uniqueness is the most important thing. If you're not unique, you don't have a proposition essentially. And the other thing is you have to have output, you have to deliver. So that's the sort of the background to this. Now, switching back then to the American Chamber of Commerce and the work we've been doing, one of the things that we've published in that document, Retuning the Growth Engine, was this notion of the circle of innovation. And we did it for a few reasons, but the main reason is that we wanted to show that there is a continuum between education, research, and commercialization. And one of the reasons that we did it was because we were smart enough as a country, when Mary Harney was the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, she figured out that handing out money to universities to do research willy-nilly wasn't really going to get us anywhere. And the introduction of SFI saw us take that money, put more money with it, and decide that they're going to give it to universities or places that do research on the basis of them being able to do world-class research and on the basis of them collaborating with industry. And that was a very, very, very significant decision that was made for us in Ireland, and a very, very positive step, and a foundation, I suppose, more than a step, that we can build on. But because we made that investment, we started in one part of the circle. We started on the research side. And as we started to build on the research side, and as we built out the CSETs, we've realised a whole lot of other things. We've realised that we don't have the flow of people at the graduate level or at the second level coming through. So we know that we're not aligned for the purpose of supplying that circle. We're not aligned on the education side. And we rely quite heavily at the moment on a feed of graduates and people from overseas. On the outbound side, on the commercialisation side, we're now starting to realise that we have to build that infrastructure, that we have this bubble in research, we have this activity, but we see this gap that we have to build. So that's why we sort of developed this notion of the wheel. In the centre of that wheel, we put a hub, and that hub we felt was what you created the wheel around, or what you created the alignment around. We have had, for many, many years, we've had good, sound fiscal policy. We still have. And I'm happy to say that while I'd be critical of many things that have been done by the public service and by the government, one of the things that has been very positive is that feedback that we have given, particularly to government and the Department of Finance, has been taken on board. And we continue to hone and develop our fiscal policy in a sound way. And more recently, you've seen the IP write-off over 15 years, which is a very positive move. The doubling of the tax credit on the R&D. So we have a good, sensible fiscal policy. But we also wanted to add to that fiscal policy, we also wanted to add something that would also help the alignment. And there, we've known for some time that science is going to drive us, and James talked about this notion of convergence. Science is going to drive convergence. It's going to force it to happen anyways. It's going to force a blurring of the physics, chemistry lines that we use today. So we know that's going to happen. We know it's going to affect markets. We can see sectoral boundaries being blurred today, even particularly in the medical area. You can see ICT and life sciences starting to cross over into each other. Now, convergence provides, again, another big opportunity, because for a lot of corporates, they're vertically stovepiped. They have their sector. And any time they try to step outside their sector and do something else, they find it very, very difficult. So we figured that that's an opportunity. If we could have a place called Ireland that became a sandbox for people to play around in this area of convergence and to be able to go across sectors and work with each other, then we had another distinct advantage. And that's why that's the sort of, if you like, the logic of the Circle of Innovation and the hub that we propose. From our own perspective, from an Ireland perspective, we have to invest in a lot of things. But the most important thing to invest in, I think, is the human capital. And the lower line there shows the pattern as we would have known it from a skills point of view in the past, up to 2005. And it was very much dominated by skills in the manufacturing and supply operations kind of sector, with an emerging amount of skill and capability in engineering, and not a lot of skill and capability in the area of sales and marketing. And of course, we have to push up to the red line. And in the clouds there, you just see the different types of skills that need to develop. Obviously, skills in the area of research, IP, technology and licensing, skills, cross-discipline skills, particularly to support the area of convergence, and skills in the area of being able to buy and sell technology and commercialise technology. We also need to develop, and we go back to the circle where we looked at the commercialisation, we also need to develop that outbound avenue from the research activity. And we have to be able to, if you like, channel the IP and the technologies that we create to some useful purpose. And the useful purpose has to be, at the end of the day, some kind of enterprise that we create, something that creates jobs. And that output is what everybody is talking about right now. It's what people are saying, asking the question, Can we get some output from the research that we're doing? When are we going to see jobs that result from that? Where are we going to see products? And of course, it's not that easy. It's not a sort of a simple step. It's quite complex. From the perspective of the Chamber and from the work of the R&D group, our view of that world was that it was like a stovepipe, that you had to put quite a lot into it and you had to have a broad input in order to get something of value out. And so, the diagram shows a contribution coming not just from the research institutes, but also from the corporates themselves, the multinationals themselves, from entrepreneurs, SMEs, startup companies. But also we added into that pile other SMEs from across Europe, that we wouldn't lock anything out in that sense. So the idea was to have that funnel and to put as much into that funnel as you possibly could. The second part of it was to be clever about the pipe itself. And so you see those valves around the pipe. They represent filters, if you like, ways of looking at proposed enterprise and supporting it. Obviously, you take any idea and you have to look at the quality of the idea and the strength of the idea in order for it to survive its journey through the pipe. But there's also other things that you need to look at. You need to look at the strength of the management team. You need to look at the flexibility and the adaptability of the idea as it's being proposed. You have to look at whether or not they have a channel to market or the ability to go to market. Now, for all of those filters, and it's not as simple as I've described it, for all of those filters, you require processes to help people or groups of people to build those businesses and help them through those businesses. Now we have different types of processes and facilities available. In the universities, we have the notion of the technology transfer offices, which are very helpful. And within those, people are trying to develop other capabilities to support startups. But what we need to think of is, and what we need to encourage, is for existing companies, and particularly multinational companies, that also have that capability, to use that capability in the pipeline, in an eco form, to allow that capability to be used and be available to people that are trying to start up companies. And the output then, at the end of that, what we all look for is we look for some kind of new enterprise, new idea, new business. And if we do that in a collaborative form, the view of the group and the view of the Chamber is that that's good for the corporate and it's good for Ireland. So when we talk about our sort of policy around R&D, and when we talk about retuning the growth engine, it was never a document that was designed to give multinationals only an advantage. It was designed to describe a place, an environment, where there was sufficient synergy existing between all the parties, including the state and the enterprise, that synergy existed, and that it was good for everybody, and that it was, back to my simple diagram at the beginning, I have always had the view, when I was responsible for an American corporate in Ireland, I've always had the view that we need to do things that are good for the corporate and are good for Ireland Inc. And that's if you like, the basis on which we developed this. So, in summary then, what I would say is that creating corporate value is probably, or is, the most important dynamic in Ireland in the current environment. It is something that we have to focus on. It is more important than anything else because the result of it is what allows us to climb out of the difficulties that we have. We should be confident that we can do it because we have a record of being able to deliver value. We have a record of being able to be adaptable and flexible to the corporate world. We've been able to maintain the level of investment over time. And the investment didn't come here because we were lucky. Investment came here because we were sufficiently wired into what was important globally, and we understood what it took to create the right incentives to get people to come here. So that's not gone away. That still exists. People understand what it takes to get the investment here. We do have work to do in order to sort of sharpen our pencil, if you like, particularly around the area of competitiveness and ensure that we remain competitive. But we understand that we have a history of creating corporate value, and that's something that stands to it and that's important. We do need to add to the hub. The fiscal policy on its own won't work. We do need to look at this area of, or some area that gives us uniqueness and creates a differentiation. We would suggest that that's convergence. because we have that in common with all corporates. All corporates at a senior level are looking at this notion of technology convergence and what it's doing. If we can provide solutions in that area, if we can provide an environment to allow them to explore and learn, that's good. We have been very successful in terms of the collaborative basis on which we've set up the research, particularly around CSETs. That's now recognised as a working model. It's been very successful. And having been involved in 2 of the CSETs, I remember the first one I was involved in was the CTVR, which was led out of Trinity. It was the one on telecommunications. And it was the first time that we had taken 8 different higher education institutes, universities and institutes of technology, brought 8 of them together. And I thought we were going to have a nightmare of a job trying to get all these people aligned. Because we had taken the system was used to competing with each other. Universities were used to the EU type of programs where they actually competed with each other. And we found that we were able to deliver a level of collaboration that really surprised us. I'm also involved in the CSET here in Derry. And again, we've just got our second round of funding. And it's amazing to see that we started off with 2 companies and now we have 8 companies involved. So we have proven that we are able to develop environments that allow collaboration to occur. Now, that's not to say that we're on top of it. We have a lot of work to do in terms of developing the quality of the collaboration, but collaboration exists and it works. In terms of alignment, I think we have a lot of work to do. We clearly have gaps in our education system in order that need to be fixed if we're going to supply the base of research that we need. And we clearly have to align whatever infrastructure we put in place for commercialisation with the research activities that we're doing. So there's quite a bit of work there. And of course, we have to deliver on the enterprise, because ultimately, even in good times, without the recession, even in good times, if we're not able to deliver on the enterprise, then the wheel won't go round. You will not get the follow-on investment. And that's something that we have to do. Innovation is what it's about. It's what creates the uniqueness. It's the mindset, more than anything else, that we need to have. And we need to have it as a nation, as individuals in universities, in research, in people in companies. It's something that has to be pervasive. It is something that we have to develop. And there are, while there's quite a bit of innovation going on, there's a lot of cultural aspects that sort of are challenging and stand in the way. And I suppose the one I'd mention is the one that Fergal mentioned. Fergal sort of quietly mentioned that it was the second enterprise and the first one failed. And the truth about it is that if you're going to have innovation, and if the innovation is going to lead to enterprise, then you have to have people who are prepared to try. And if you don't recognise that trying is about succeeding sometimes and failing a lot of times, then you're missing the point about.
Passionate about it. It's become an engine for growth in GSK. And quite recently, I came back from a long overdue job to my family home and was just thinking that I mentioned out loud that this idea has worked so well for Glaxo that it could actually translate into something that would work for Ireland Inc. and perhaps convert all this rhetoric about innovation into tangible innovation assets for the country. And then a couple of days later, my 10-year-old daughter told me that at news time in her class that she had, while the others were talking about picnics and various things and sporting occasions, that she had said that her dad was going to save the country from recession. And that's what I hope to do. And then tomorrow I might save the continent from recession. But in order to save Ireland from recession, I need your help, and I want to engage you a bit in this idea. So, first of all, Damien, you wouldn't just run that little video for me, would you? I just want to give you a sense of, in GSK, David Oakley used to say that advertising was the most fun you could have and still keep your clothes on. I think innovation has taken that over. So despite all the sort of concepts and models and scatter diagrams you see, there's still a lot of fun to be had working in innovation. But here's an interesting commercial from the US that shows just how difficult it can be.
He's the first janitor in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Yeah, so I want to talk to you a little bit about how to convert raw ideas with potential into tangible innovation assets for a company. And I just want to see if I can get this to work. Just wanted to say a little bit about Glaxo, because of course there's no right answer for innovation, and we don't have all the right answers. But I hope you'll recognise some of these brands. Thank you. Because not so much for the consumer business for which I work is about a £4 billion business, and a lot of those brands sell over $250 million a year. But sort of bear in mind that in each category, in Lucozade we compete against Coca-Cola, in Aquafresh and Sensodyne we compete against Colgate and P&G. We're up against some very formidable opposition in the marketplace. Ecosystem. But GSK is the second biggest pharmaceutical company in the world, and it's I think the competitiveness of the pharmaceutical industry is worth thinking about for a moment, because if we don't have, when our products hit the patent cliff, if we don't have the next big thing, not so much in the consumer business, but in the pharma business, then we're out of business. Now, GSK is the second biggest pharma company in the world. It's one of the top 10 R&D spenders in the world. We've recently been x-rayed by UBS to evaluate our proficiency at innovation, and thankfully we were rated as better than J&J and P&G at the development of organic new bits of innovation and the commercialization of those bits of innovation around the world. The company has a fantastic global footprint, and therefore we can spin out ideas very quickly around the world. So the company, well, I would say, and this one. So the company doesn't have all the answers, but the thing is, my job, in a way, is to create remarkable innovation that makes some sort of visceral connection to people. And that's what, what we challenge ourselves with. Can we make innovation that's comparable to the launch of the iPhone in San Francisco in 2007, or the release of the Deathly Hallows, the last installment of the Harry Potter set. And that's quite difficult when you're working on hemorrhoid preparations and indigestion remedies. But that's our kind of benchmark. The other thing is that, we take the ideas for products from heartbeat to high street. This is where they compete, the most savage and competitive, cutthroat environment there is around the world. And therefore, for our brands to create some traction with consumers, we need to be certain that they own a little bit of real estate that's distinctive, that's compelling, that's unique in people's minds. So our brands, when people buy them, have to offer some promise of certainty about their performance and have to make some kind of a visceral connection with consumers. And for us to do that, we need to know a lot about our consumers' lives, etc. We need to, if they're sort of complex, non-linear, illogical, buying mainly on emotion rather than for rational reasons. And in GSK, we've kind of now, I'd say it's probably not overstating to say that a focus group would be a firing offence in Glaxo. We're way past any of that. But we feel that the sort of ideas that we're looking for are latent and unarticulated, and that consumers don't really know what they want. And they can't really imagine a portfolio or repertoire of brands or a usage of brands or an evoked set in the future, because if they would, they'd be doing our job. So we're looking at more deeper ways of getting to understand, to finesse the latent, unarticulated needs of consumers. We've invested a lot in competencies in these sort of impressionistic techniques that, so those of you who subscribe to Time magazine will see that Martin Lindstrom somehow or other managed to get into the Time magazine's top 100 people for this book, Biology, which is the biggest single experiment in the world in fMRI neuroimaging. So where if consumers can't tell us what they want in focus groups, we won't scruple to lift the lid of the neocortex and have a look at the limbic system inside and see exactly what's going on. There's another evidence-based stuff, this facial coding thing. So a guy called Dan Hill is the world's leading expert. The face, I think, is the only place where the muscles and the skin are directly connected. So even though in a focus group you might say that you think an ad is particularly appealing, the facial coding is the sort of stuff that the software is so well developed that they deploy it in all the major airports, and it's the sort of thing that picks people out as they swagger nonchalantly past with a kilo of heroin in their baggage. This facial coding software is the thing that picks them out, etc. And then we've kind of, for our ordinary qual stuff, we're much more into ethnography now, spending time with consumers, living with them, particularly in areas, and the areas that I work a bit in are people quitting smoking, where you can have a focus group, and it's inevitably like the last chapter of an Agatha Christie novel. Like, nobody tells the truth about themselves quitting smoking. Or when we do focus groups about denture care, in the States it would be preferable, I mean, people would prefer to admit to be on the paedophile register in their local community than to say that they wore dentures. And there's a sort of a surreptitious way of concealing the packaging and all this sort of stuff that doesn't come through in focus groups. So anyway, this is just to say that for us to find really deep, meaningful insights on which we can build ideas, we've got to look deep and hard for them. And I've been studying innovation as well as practicing innovation. I find there seem to be a few myths that prevail around organizations. And one of them is, it seems to be the case here, it's in fact seems to be a myth that prevails in the Irish government, is that innovation and science are interrelated, and it doesn't happen in the lab. And this sort of model of education, research, discovery, commercialization is the only model. And so we certainly don't think so, because a lot of our insights, some of our stuff is technology driven, but most of our stuff is consumer driven. The other thing is that innovation, like an Innovation Day, it's an event. The ideas will arrive on quota, and there are loads of companies out there making good living suggesting that there's some kind of formula to innovation. Whereas I'd be more on James's line about this, that I think there's this kind of an alchemy about it, that it is a bit more like the falling in love thing. There's a little bit of magic that happens between, on the borders of functions where divergent expertise meet and something special happens. The way that the Beatles would write a song or something like that. You can't script it or schedule it just because it happens to be Innovation Day. The other stuff is that there is somebody in an organization, a champion, who gets a blinding flash of inspiration and defies all the odds and takes on the organization and makes something happen. And there are characters who perpetuate that myth. I'm pretty sure that we have too many in Ireland, but there is some evidence behind that myth. And then the last one is that this kind of black box effect, that you put in people and processes and suddenly something magical will happen. But the truth is, as Gary Hamill put it there, is that it's not that easy to translate innovation from being a priority, engaging all the senses. So if you want to look at the act of packaging and think maybe we could do more with smell, or we could have a kind of an intel inside trademark sound, or there must be some, the teams would get together themselves in their regional locations and develop ideas around some of the exercises. And then they, because it's a network, they aggregate those ideas up to a bigger group and get a bit more traction from them. And that's when it occurred to me that this sort of program involved in a coalition of innovation practice, developing ideas, having ideas firing around like synapses in between forward-leaning, interested tipping point innovation type people. The companies would just designate a member who would give an afternoon, a month to the group, and would work on their projects and other people's projects, etc. So I thought the idea was so, especially as my daughter seemed to have been taken with the idea. I did present it a couple of weeks ago to the minister in a more formalised way than this, and I think from what one can tell from what politicians say, he did give it his blessing, and I'm working with some guys in Enterprise Ireland, some Sir Humphrey types, to maybe see if it get off the ground. But anyway, that concludes the presentation. Just a little idea, but I'd like you to come with me on this journey to save the Irish economy. Thank you very much.
Two questions. First one is tomorrow. You won the tender in the US, and as a Zero Knock Plus for the US market. What is the ownership around your IP, or what was the agreement if you're now going to commercialise this here? And my second question is for Fergal, that you seem to prevent the wind energy in the US under different political regimes, so well done, that didn't support green energy. But did you have a base there before you made that decision, and were you going against the grain when you did make that investment?
Sure. If I understand it correctly, the way we went into the States with you're talking about the license agreement now?
With the rapid growth in that technology, so once that's developed for Las Vegas, and
Yeah.
is that the technology that you're now bringing here? Who owns that? Who won a tender? So does bus company own the technology?
No, we own it. We own the IP in the system. We're not the producers of electric motors and generators and so on. We basically choose systems partners. So we're effectively systems integrators, but we are the design authority for the vehicle. And there are aspects of the vehicle for which we've been able to register design both in Europe and in the United States. The configuration of the vehicle is particularly tuned to the US requirement, and when we bring it back, if you like, to Ireland and to Europe, it'll have a smaller engine, it'll be a lot lighter, etc. But we've built it to withstand their particularly stringent requirements. But we've been able to retain ownership of all the IP. I mean, that was absolutely critical from the start, because what we didn't want to find ourselves was at the mercy of license agreements and so forth that restricted our ability to export elsewhere. But what we will do most likely is transfer the technology to probably to one US partner for assembly within the United States only. Was that what you were looking at? I didn't catch all your question.
Sorry, you were asking me, had we already established a presence in the US before we went into the energy market in the US? Yes, we had. I mean, we've been operating in the US since 2000, and we had our traditional engineering services type offering out there. And again, a lot of that was on the back of relationships we had here with some of the US multinationals. So natural progression for us would have been to follow them back, or follow them out to the US and try and get some business out there. Now we did, make a decision, did some research, made a decision to get into the energy market, and we had figured that the best and easiest way for us to do it would be to make an acquisition. So we bought an existing US company who was already playing in that field in 2006. Is that okay?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, initially it was for Mark. Given that you were exploring and you got this business in Las Vegas, my question is, what experience did you have during the patent filing? It's like, what experience did you have?
Of what? Sorry, of which aspect?
Did you patent over there?
Well, it's, as I was saying earlier, it's really, you kind of have to proceed with caution. There's no doubt about that. But and there are parts of the world, there are specific countries that are almost no-go areas if you're looking to try and actually, have a clear and registrable piece of IP. But the States, is, it's crowded with litigators that will, once you've actually taken the trouble to protect your intellectual property, it's really let everybody else beware, because there's very, very strong law that actually will uphold that. I think that the thing for us was we began about 10 years ago in the States, and we were trying to figure out the best way to get into a market which is federally funded and therefore has this big Buy America protection built around it. So what that essentially means is that because all of the buses are bought with federal dollars, they come within the ambit of Buy America. Buy America says that 60% by value of the product has to be sourced in the United States of America, and more than that in the case of buses. There's a schedule of all the things that have to be sourced, e.g. axles, engines, transmissions, electrical systems. When you read to the end, you think, well, where the hell's the rest? So what they're really saying, and they add to this every year, is it's, if we're going to spend Fed dollars, there has to go on American companies, and now more than ever. So if you want to get into a market that's federally funded, you have to find basically a local partner, a technology transfer solution. And so we did it in a small way 10 years ago with a small bus. We developed it in Ireland, had it certified and homologated in the States, found ourselves a partner company. They entered into a technology transfer and licensing agreement with us. All of the IP was wrapped up in a company that we set up for the purpose to ring fence the IP and all the liabilities that were coming back from the States towards us. And essentially what we're doing with the big product now is building on that tried and tested model that's been working very well for us for 10 years.
A comment and a question. Just listening to Mike and Peter there, it sort of strikes me that perhaps what we need is what Julian might call maybe a management or an innovation management model for countries. But I'd like to ask Mike a particular question. You spoke about the need for alignment of commercialization infrastructure. Could you give us more of your thoughts on that, please?
I think when we look at the commercialization infrastructure, there's pieces that we're putting in place, and there's, if we look at everything we put in place is just a reaction to a gap as we come to the gap. Okay, so we haven't really thought through exactly what the full infrastructure looks like. So when we put in place the technology transfer offices, we did that because we'd got to the point where we had patents and we had some technologies that we had to license. And then when we got that far, we had the people there trying to look at the next stage and how they help people to actually create an enterprise. So the point is that this is something that we're starting and trying to develop. Now, in terms of the way we develop that infrastructure, I think we have to develop it in an eco form. And a lot of the supports that are required can be had from the existing base. And by that I mean, for instance, if you're trying to start up a company, in Ireland particularly, where the market is so small that you're not going to do anything here, the first problem that you're going to face, assuming that it's a fairly robust idea, is what's your channel to market? How are you going to get it out there? And what you find is that there's a base of corporates here that have those channels. And if there's a way that we can develop the relationships, or we can develop the ecosystem in such a fashion that we can use those channels, that becomes, at literally less cost, part of the infrastructure that we can develop. And there are other opportunities like that we can develop. But the idea is that we have to have a notion in our heads before we start doing this, that we're prepared to collaborate. Peter said the same thing, though, the idea of bringing people together that have no competitive reason to not to work with each other, and trying to figure out what's the asset base, how can you leverage that asset base, and how can you work a total model then that allows people to use that base.
Depending on who we're talking to in the company and where we are within the company, I mean, we certainly, if we are starting up, shall we say, a major initiative like the move into Asia, what we're offering there is the opportunity for the person who's heading up that initiative, or the guy who actually has gone over to Shanghai and is living over there, what he has is the opportunity, if he achieves certain targets within 3 or 4 years, to own 25% of that operation. He will earn that, and then he will work that maybe for, I think it's another 3 to 5 years. There's a second set of targets put in on that, and then those shares are then swapped up into the Topco. So we have ended up, I started the company up myself with 100% of it. I have worked myself down to about 49% now at this stage. It's ownership really is the key driver at a particular level. The other levels are, we have the standard profit shares, the bonus systems and that standard enough stuff. But for key initiatives or for major projects, major initiatives, it's an ownership.
You were to give a reason why your company succeeded in doing just that, reinventing itself almost more so than maybe other companies in that space who are fair to do that. What factor, 1 or 2 factors, would you say were most significant to enable you to do that?
very difficult to answer that, I suppose, without thinking that one through. In some senses, there's a culture in our place, and Mike and I both talked about it. I mean, is that everybody can fail, everybody will fail. I mean, everybody will make mistakes. I mean, I don't expect anybody to make the same mistake twice. Making it once is forgivable, So we try and foster that culture. I mean, I would always be, I'm not afraid of risk, and I would hope that culture runs down through. Now, I can immediately think of 2 or 3 people in my three partners that are very afraid of risk, but I mean, that balance is probably quite good to have as well. I think it's a cultural thing, and I kind of mentioned that. I mean, that's one of the fears I have, is that as we become a bigger company, and we start putting policies and procedures in place, and I really don't want to become, your kind of stereotypical multinational, with all due respects to. I mean, I have seen some great practices in some of our customer sites. I have seen some awful practices. That didn't really answer your question, did it? No.
I have a question for Mark. I'm just interested about the interaction of the Wright family, Fergal, and governance of the company. The emphasis on innovation in the company, was that driven more so by personal beliefs and vision of the family members of the board, or was it a combination of perhaps the interest like that and competitive strategy? As well as the main driver of the innovation?
I think it was driven by the founders of the company. We're third generation, and one of the founders, it was literally a father and son business, and the son, William, is now 83 years old, and I was telling people earlier, he's still in the firm every day. He's Minister without portfolio, so he carries digital cameras, very happy to bring me photographs and tell me what's going on behind my back, but by the same token, he's just this romantic visionary engineer. He's not a qualified engineer, but he's a guy that has a vision and rushes off and cuts metal, and he's never been frightened of taking risks. Now, we're in a digital age, and we're a much bigger company, so some of these risks have to be balanced and measured, and we do things systematically now where he would have done things on the hoof, but I would say he is still our inspiration. I think that will ultimately be his legacy. It will be, don't be afraid of taking risk, and we can't compete on a nut and bolt level or an hour by hour level with manufacturers in Eastern Europe or India or China, but we can do things in a hurry, and we can do things that they would find very hard to reproduce. And I think so. Whilst we perhaps don't have a formal, if you like, culture of innovation. I mean, it's very interesting to hear the models talked about today. I think we've all inherited his passion for doing things differently, and that's our mission really, is to continue that. And the working for a family company is a very interesting and challenging dynamic. And the thing is, not to get caught in the crossfire when they're having a family argument, but they all believe deeply and passionately in the business, and they've inherited, I guess, the founder's original vision for the company, and when in doubt, they will always tell us to take the risk, make the decision, and move on. Because even if some projects fail, the history so far has kind of proven to us that 9 times out of 10 we do get it nearly right. And the failures you have to live with and learn from. So.
This is for Peter. Does GSK have a target like 3M does of the level of turnover derived from products introduced in the last so many years?
Yeah, we do. We have now the Spark Network people would not be subject to a target, but people like me would be, in terms of the amount of revenue that we have to generate in raw ideas or new ideas that we shepherd into the business. So then we'd also, when we're presenting our business figures, one of the metrics, we certainly, we would have metrics which I think is either 20 or 25% around the world has to be new products, and depending on the lead markets, obviously the percentage will be higher in some markets than in others. But yeah, we have to have, I mean, I suppose that's the thing I struggle with a little bit in terms of my analogy of, the alchemy and the magic of innovation, that's, in a big company like Glaxo, you have to have the magic and alchemy of that sort of falling in love metaphor, but it has to be repeatable, predictable, and scalable.
Every night.
Exactly.
And what is a new product? I mean, how long is it allowed to be called new? Is it just the first year of introduction, or do you get 2 or 3 years to add the figures?
Most of our portfolios would be refreshed every year. So if it was a Lucasade or an Aquafresh thing, the churn rate in those markets is incredible. And like Colgate would be launching in North America 6 or 7. They'd be launching something every 8 weeks. And obviously now these days Walmart and those guys are in a kind of 1 in, 1 out model. But 1 year is as long as we're allowed to call something new.
Two parts to my question. First part of my question to Mark, Fergal and Peter, and Mike if you want to chip in as well. How much are each of your organisations investing in R&D each year? I suppose however you want to answer that, by reference to a percentage of turnover or whatever metric you use. And the second part of my question is if you could describe briefly your process for, I suppose, screening and prioritising what projects get the green light for R&D investment.
Well, briefly, we spend about 5% of turnover on R&D. Every year we say we need to really keep a lid on this. We can't let these projects run away with us, and every year the projects run away with us. I've never known a time in the company. Every year I say, this year, guys, we're going to do one thing really well, and we end up talking ourselves into doing 6. And it just seems to be the way the business demands things to be done. And of those 6, 3 or 4 are going to be relatively minor projects. They're going to be, €250,000 €500,000 projects, but at least a couple are going to be €1 million plus, and they're going to suck in, teams of 10 and 12 engineers. We're driven very much by where we see the market going. That's what helps us prioritise the projects. Occasionally, like right now, for instance, the projects are being driven by getting out of this blinking recession and finding new markets, either for tweaks on existing products, or in one case, we're launching a new vehicle at the end of this year, a new small bus in a segment of the market that we have never played in before. And really, from a standing start in 9 months, we aim to get something on the streets and be best in class. So, those things sometimes, necessity is the mother of invention, and that's very much, I think, where we are at the moment.
I'm going to fudge this one. We're a service company. We don't make products. We don't. A lot of what we do, the percentage we spend would depend on what it is we want to do. For example, some of our initiatives are moving to wind, or moving to renewable energies, or moving to Asia. That's one part of the business, and that would go through a fairly extensive financial forecasting and ROIs and that. Some of the other stuff we do certainly with 3 customers I know on site. I mean, part of the metrics and how we're measured on site is that we will come to them with at least 3 VIPs, what we call value improvement programs. Ideas, whatever like that, every month. But that'll be more feed into the customer's system and that end of it. That has been quite successful. That's one of the metrics that we're measured on our customer site. So to be able to, I can't give you a definitive answer on that. So I'll pass over to who's next.
I'm afraid I can't remember the percentage of GSK's turnover they spend, but it's certainly around 10. I think it's into the billions. The turnover of the total company is 27 billion. Probably don't need that, but the process for deciding which ideas, the ranking and prioritization of ideas, is relatively logical, to be honest with you. In fact, if you want to push through an idea in GSK, it feels like making a case to the Supreme Court that you actually have to, while there's a lot of fluidity and experimentation around in trialling and piloting and development of new ideas, we work through a process where we, the bit that I'm largely involved in is finding out ideas, amplifying the bits that have real traction, and finding out what sort of a pulse or heartbeat an idea has. And then we can go into various phases of volumetric research. So we can tell, part of that community there that I showed you, one of the things that they've got at their disposal, or that we have at our disposal, is a consumer community. So we can pump in a lot of ideas. There's a company called Communispace in the US, worth looking up. They're basically the biggest online provider of consumer community groups, so that you can sense check ideas and play with ideas and get them to rank and probe and develop and stuff like that, ideas, and they become great ambassadors for their stuff. So ideas emerge strongly out of that. Then we put them into volumetric testing. Companies like Bases and Research International do that. And then essentially it will always be some sort of trade-off between how big the opportunity is, the desirability of what it is, and whether it's new to the market, etc., and how difficult it is to deliver. Do we need extra third-party contractors? How long is it going to take? So there's sort of a doability and desirability graph, and we would assess all our portfolio of new product options accordingly, and the ones that have promised the highest yield in the least amount of time get priority.
Maybe just to add, if you look at from a different perspective, if you look at the R&D investments in Ireland, foreign direct investments in Ireland last year, it was about a quarter of the 2 billion that was invested. So we're, in an Irish context, from a multinational point of view, we're picking up, a significant portion of the investment that's been made in research, even as we are without anything. The second point would be, I think that when you look at new product and research budgets in corporates, what you find is that there's a certain sort of threshold that the proposer has to pass before a budget is applied. And if you look at those thresholds, what you often find is that in the threshold there's a revenue number, and a project or a product has to hit a certain revenue number, and in a large corp that's a big number, it's several billion. Okay? But at the same time, there are several projects that come through for review that don't meet the threshold. Okay, and they're very sound projects. And we're now finding there's cases already in Ireland where corporates, and I'm thinking primarily in the ICT sector, are starting to discuss the loosening up of some of those ideas. In the initial form, it's coming as maybe a product or a piece of software or something that's available the corporate's not going to use because it doesn't meet the threshold, but they see value in it and they're prepared to license or give it to somebody else. And we believe that there's a lot of that type of product and idea sitting out there that's licensable. But we also think that in a certain kind of environment, corporates might be prepared to develop those products in an ecosystem, particularly if there were other parties interested in joining with them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that level of product that doesn't make the grade, if you like, or doesn't make the threshold for a budget inside the corporate.
I think we'll take 2 more questions.
Sorry, there's a product called Shimmer that Intel licensed out to a small little company in the contract in Dublin. That's one example. But I wanted to ask, there's obviously GSK and the American Chamber. Like, you would be sort of in the realms of best practices in innovation management and innovation practices, tools, and so on. How closely are you working with the SMEs and the startups to bring that type of knowledge? Because the people in your companies have the wherewithal to lift Ireland Inc. and sort of to tell people how to do innovation, how to get the most out of their ideas and commercialise and so on. At GSKs and so on, working with on the ground, the startups, the SMEs. I know that's not your job to do it, but the people in your organisation have the skills to lift everybody. Is that part of your ethical?
Yeah, I don't know how we could accomplish that. I personally have felt that I was willing to share that model with the government to see if Enterprise Ireland or the IMI or InterTrade Ireland or something like that would connect companies to try and develop ideas. But in terms of our local context, or whether we run workshops, we don't really. In a way, it's pretty much a full-time job, staying ahead of Pfizer and P&G, etc. So I don't know of any mechanism where we can mentor companies. We generally, if there weren't competing companies, we wouldn't really be averse to it either if there was such a facility.
You have a list of logos, you know, and they could all get all the best brains together. And that's where the potential things have to be.
Yeah.
And the network of those.
Yeah, the collaborative work that's going on in research, I think, starts to address some of the things that you're pointing to. And we have, again, if I look at the CSET here in Galway, the Dairy CSET, we have in that combination of companies, we have large companies and we have small companies. We have, several multinationals and then we have a handful of small companies. And that starts to address the issue. From a chamber point of view, the model that we propose is one that's an ecosystem, so therefore companies, where they can help, should help. And as you said, there's no corporate has an aversion to doing that. And you find at a local level, there's a lot of help being passed out, particularly in the area of education as distinct from enterprise. And in that respect, one of the programs that we've driven last year was we have added to the BT Young Scientist program a module for young scientists to be able to access people in industry. And again, a lot of corporates willing to do that. And that's where somebody wanting to do some particular piece of experimentation or whatever can access an expert inside the industry. So there's no objection to doing it. The question is how would you find useful ways of doing it? And we are starting to do it on the research side.
I just think maybe from our side and coming back to maybe just best practices and the learnings and stuff like that. I think there's two sides to it. I think the multinationals want to be very, very careful, and they're paranoid about being seen to maybe endorse one Irish SME over another, or if they introduce training systems, or they certainly don't want to be accused of favoritism or anything like that. So I mean that instills a level of paranoia in them when it comes to that. I mean, any of our multinational customers, we're not allowed to use their names in any of our advertising. But the other side of that is, when you do sit down with them and you talk to them face to face, I mean, they'll certainly lay out, this is where we expect you to be. This is the, the type of behaviours, the type of standards, the type of policies and procedures, we would expect you to have in place if you were to do business with us, and they will work with you. That goes across everything. As I mentioned earlier, the accounting system, the online accounting systems, safety from just, and you do pick up an awful lot of just best practices yourself that you just take the ideas back home with you and introduce them. So I don't know whether or how a kind of a formal training or a learning thing would work without it becoming a monster. So maybe there is a kind of a middle ground there. I don't know.
Okay, last question.
This question is for you guys. All believe in innovation quite highly, and it seems that business schools today, and Julian brought this up, that his lab was not well received within the London Business School. Do you think that innovation and creativity can be taught formally in a business school, or does it have to be taught sort of on the ground in a cultural, inside of a corporation? I mean, Seth Godin, you mentioned, is taking people and giving them virtual MBAs, if you will. And whether they're accredited or not, that's really teaching innovation and creativity.
I must say, your question is interesting. I'm not often in an academic setting like this, and it did occur to me a bit this morning in some of the presentations yesterday that being preached about innovation from academics was a little bit like having sex education from the Christian Brothers many years ago. It's sort of, as it turned out, they may have known a bit more about it than they let on at the time. But I think the notions of innovation, entrepreneurship can be taught, but I kind of feel it has to be some sort of transition model, because I feel that Well, from the more time I spend with academics, the more it seems that they're working to completely different metrics, and that there are certain inhibitory factors in the system that mean that PhDs seem to veer much more towards a career in academia, and therefore the commercialization of research and the interaction with industry and those things are not, there seems to be the system discourages those things. But I kind of feel that a school to university to PhD to academic thing is not enough to be able to train other people in creativity and innovation.
Okay, it falls upon me to wrap it up. I think first of all, thank you for what is very interesting. If I was to, with my own bias in terms of looking at this, I think there's two things that I would take out. Some of this would probably echo the last speaker. I think there's a learning by doing. Okay, so I think there's certainly pointed Mark. I was struck by the fact that you bought in a license 30 years ago, but you then adopted it and it effectively became yours. So while you could buy it in, it was the added value. I was struck by Fergal's when they were going through this change process where you said that the process was probably more important than the product and the outcomes. There's this sense of a learning by actually doing stuff. So the innovation is real and on the ground. I think on the other side of that, to answer, sometimes there's a need for the discussion this morning from Julian in terms of actually understanding what that learning by doing is, how you are learning so that you can improve it. I think the other thing that I'm struck by is the sense of, call it what you like, networking, coalition of innovation practice. I think pretty much it was talked about across all four. And I think it's interesting that it goes from within the company. So even in Fergal's, in terms of because everyone's on site, they've created this intranet which allows people to come back in, to the idea that Peter mentioned in terms of your sparks, and then to Mike's at a national level. And I think that's part of the sense, and to answer your question in terms of the role of business schools, maybe the role of business schools as well as communicating is providing a forum in which people can interact in a networked environment. And I think part of why CISC has wanted to do this, and part of its uniqueness in terms of creating something, is it successfully brings people representing the triple helix together in a fairly consistent manner in a room. And I think that's important. I think if you stand back and watch leaders, managers, they're the ones whose mental model converts something into something of value. So it's the ability to expose them to leading thought leaders and also to have the multinationals beside the SMEs in events like this is what creates value. That's part of the remit of a university, is to do that. And with that, I want to thank InterTrade Ireland, because InterTrade Ireland made this event possible. Moving beyond that, I want to thank the team in CISC who did all the work to make this come into being. And then there are others who supported us from the university and the press office on that. And to say to you, you have the details on the next one, which again is an international thought leader in terms of Henry Chesbrough. So look at that in terms of your dates. And finally, I think I want to then finish by saying all of these speakers came of their own time, came up with their own time to create this networking opportunity. And I just want to thank them especially for that. Thanks very much.